Well, Rebecca McKinnon is the Director of Ranking Digital Rights, which works to set global standards for freedom of expression and privacy on the internet, as well as protecting users' rights. And she joins us live now from Stockholm, where she's attending the Stockholm Internet Forum. Rebecca, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk firstly about Facebook's decision, this new one-strike policy. Is it going to be the answer?
Well, that will certainly help. There's no one silver bullet or one technical fix that is going to solve a very complex problem of terrorism, both online and offline.
Because in a sense, it only just takes one live stream like the one we saw in Christchurch to do the damage.
Well, that's true. I think one of the other issues here that we're seeing, I think, in drafts of the Christchurch call that have been circulating around the activist community, is that the Christchurch call is focusing on companies need to take responsibility as well as to work with governments. And it is true that companies have not done enough to really conduct risk assessments on their business models and their design to ensure that users are not harmed by features that have been set up for, cool reasons that seem to be cool, seem to be enjoyable, seem to be good for the business, but might not have been thoroughly vetted in terms of what the consequences are. And this is certainly a good step to push companies to conduct risk assessments, not only on how their platforms might be misused by evil people, but also on how the platforms and their management and the efforts to prevent bad people from misusing the platform will also not prevent activist journalists and other people from using and benefiting from the platform.
And this is the fine balance that you're constantly examining. But let's look at the Christchurch call. How realistic, as you pointed out at the very beginning, is it to really stamp out this kind of violent extremism spreading?
Well, again, I think this is one of many efforts taking place. There are some concerns about potential collateral damage as well. There are a lot of counterterrorism laws, laws being passed by governments around the world, banning extremism and terrorism online that are misused and that end up being turned against civil society, against political opposition and dissidents. So there is a concern that this, in order for the Christchurch call to have legitimacy and to have true support across a range of actors in a range of societies, it's also very important that governments acknowledge up front that the fight against terror ultimately is only going to succeed if governments live up to their very strong duty to protect human rights, and that is part and parcel of this effort. So it requires that governments be demonstrating that they're actually using these mechanisms and these efforts for the right reasons and not to further political and other agendas. So that's part of the issue as well, that there needs to be some trust built, I think, on many sides, because the companies themselves also are receiving requests from governments all over the world every day to take down content that is posted by activists, that is posted by dissidents, that is posted by members of religious groups that are defined as terrorists by a particular government, but are not the types of people that this particular call is aimed to target. So because we have a range of ways in which governments are using counterterror, some I think in very legitimate ways that are compatible with human rights, that really are dealing with terrorists, as would be defined in a human rights context. But there are many other governments that use counterterror mechanisms for lots of other different reasons to further their political power. And so one of the challenges for the success of this Christchurch call is to build trust.
Talking of trust, of course, that ideology goes a lot deeper than necessarily the platforms that they are being distributed on. And as I'm sure you are well aware, I mean, the internet is extraordinary for going deeper and deeper in terms of hiding that ideology and that kind of hate speech.
Well, sure. And, you know, I think part of the problem here is that you're not going to fix the internet any more than you're going to fix human nature or fix human offline society just with one agreement or even a technical fix, right? This is going to be an ongoing problem always. And as the technology evolves, we have to continue to innovate to find ways to address the problems. But one of the biggest issues here is the way that the design of platforms can sometimes spread extremist ideologies to people who wouldn't otherwise have encountered it, to enable extremists to organize, to commit violent acts of terror. And so one of the things that we certainly need to look at is how platforms are designed in ways that both help democracy activists organize movements against dictators, are sometimes also used by very evil people. And so how do we work together as societies, both governments and citizens and companies, who share common values, both in terms of being against terror, but also supporting human rights, pluralism, and democracy and tolerance. How do we build systems to deal with the bad guys without stifling human rights? And that is a constant sort of organic effort that requires a whole ecosystem of efforts. Some of the efforts are technical. Some of the efforts are just about different groups and companies and governments working together. But the key is that anybody who's exercising power over speech, over online speech, to regulate it or to moderate it on a platform, needs to be held accountable. They need to be held accountable for ways in which rights are being violated, in addition to ways in which crimes might also be facilitated. What
genuine intent do you think there is on behalf of the platforms themselves to come to the party?
Well, I think the platforms certainly have a number of issues or interests. One is that if they don't come to the table, the regulatory crackdown on them will be much harder, and that will be worse for their business. They also want to be trusted. If they want global communities to be using their platforms, people do want to be able to feel safe, and that they're not going to have their lives threatened in social media and so on. So they do want to figure out a way to address these problems. But the companies are also, as I mentioned earlier, getting demands from governments every day to take down content that is very clearly not terrorism, but governments are calling it such. So they're really caught between a rock and a hard place some of the time, where human rights groups are calling on companies to preserve their speech, whereas governments are not always acting in let's say, compliance with human rights standards. So it is a very difficult situation. You know, one example is that on YouTube, people in Syria trying to document war crimes try to use YouTube to document those war crimes, but YouTube, in its effort to respond to government demands to keep terror content off its platform, then deletes this documentary evidence of war crimes by mistake, basically. And because there's such a volume of different things that they're trying to deal with. So it's a complicated issue. There is no quick technical fix. You can't fix the problems of human society like you fix a television with one tweak of design or tweak of a rule. This requires just ongoing efforts, and we certainly should applaud the governments who are trying to address this issue in a nuanced way, recognizing that it's going to require an ongoing dialogue But I do think it's important for the governments involved to have some humility and recognize that they too need to be held accountable, and they too need to build trust with many communities who have good reasons not to trust the ways in which governments are making demands of tech platforms.
And Rebecca, too, talking about a rock and a hard place, it's also a rock and massive revenue, and we're already seeing evidence that Donald Trump is already investing heavily again in Facebook in the run-up to the presidential campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is an issue. We look at the extent to which many platforms, including Facebook, conduct impact assessments to address whether their business model is causing harm, or how their business model can result in manipulation. Certainly, Facebook had not been carrying out the kind of due diligence to anticipate the way its targeted advertising business model would basically be used by many people, so again, this is tough. The online world, social media, is now being used by all kinds of political actors, again, from human rights groups to every kind of political organization you can imagine, some of which one likes and some of which one doesn't. And so just to understand this battleground and Facebook needing to own up to the power it exercises, and the way in which it empowers different actors, and to ensure that when power is being exercised over its platform, that it's transparent, it's clear what's happening, that people understand, that people are not being manipulated unawares. That is the biggest issue, I think, for democracy today, is the danger that because we have these platforms that everyone is so dependent on, that our speech, that our access to information, that people's knowledge of who we are and what we're doing, both by private and government actors, will be opaque, and so we won't understand how we're being manipulated and watched.
Rebecca McKinnon in Stockholm, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.